fag end of the 18th century, you find a situation arisen when the English had taken most of the country under their control. The Nizam had capitulated, and the only two powers that were left for the Marathas and Tipu Sultan. So, and the Marathas were fighting amongst themselves because in the last Peshwa fell due to an accident and died. There was a succession struggle, who will take his place. And that kind of put Marathas out of the equation when it came to fighting Tipu Sultan. In fact, at that time, the Peshwa Baji Rao II was not very keen to fight against Tipu with the English. Though Nana Fadnavis had given his word, so he was. Eventually, the British had to go alone and fight him, and the Marathas were a little taken aback by the speed at which Tipu capitulated to them and Srirangapatnam fell. And after Tipu fell, you suddenly find, if you look at the map of India, that the Marathas are practically surrounded all around their dominions, which were principally in the west and in the central part, right up to Delhi. And the English from the east, from the south, as well as from the southeast, you find have been surrounding the central Maratha province. And no other power, Indian power worth its name at that time, could stand up against the British power.
Can I go back a little bit on the actual Maratha history before I get to Peshwas, because it's necessary to know. I mean, most people think that there was India, but in the 16th century, there was no notion of an actual country. It was mostly principalities. So basically, there was above the Narmada, which was called the Hindustan, and there was the Deccan. In this period, of course, Deccan, as everybody knows, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and how he began, how the idea of Swarajya was born.
So let's see, the mid 17th century, you find that India is divided into the Bahmani powers in the south and the Mughal Empire, which was bordering almost Ahmednagar. It had reached Ahmednagar. And in between these two major powers, you find the district of Pune, which was the ancestral Jagir of Shivaji Raja. And from here he began his enterprise for Swarajya, or own rule, because he felt that his people were being oppressed by both these powers for several centuries. And that enterprise of Swarajya grew into an independent kingdom when he crowned himself as king, as Chhatrapati in 1674. After his death, his son Chhatrapati Sambhaji took over.
Later on, after Raja Ram and Sambhaji Maharaj, Shah Maharaj was the new king. That is when the first Peshwa, Baji Vishwanath, he came into the picture. And he was Baji Vishwanath Bhatt from Srivardhan, Konkan. He came in contact with Shah Maharaj, and 1713 he was given the title of the Peshwa. So he was essentially the first Peshwa to come into the picture, as you can see. So if you go to see from 1713, when he was titled the Peshwa, till 1818, it was the Peshwa powerhouse, you can call it, under, of course, the Shah Maharaj and later Raja Ram II. This history is something which is not really into the limelight, has never been in the limelight, but just the fact that we were there for more than 100 years says a lot about the Peshwas and how they, especially Baji Rao and Nana Sahib, his son, how they expanded our Maratha territory, you can say, and created a samrajya out of what was initially self-rule started by Shivaji Maharaj. Slowly and steadily, like Baji Rao's times, there were the Holkars, the Scindias, who he trained and got them to a certain level. They were all generals. During Nana Sahib's time, there were the Mendares and the Pethes, Holkars and Scindias were there, the Gaikwads were there.
It was in the times of Baji Rao's son, Nana Sahib Peshwa, between 1740 and 1761, that the English and the French actually first made their entry into India, into Indian politics in the Carnatic, the Nawab of Arcot and so on. And that is the time the Marathas spread northwards. So in 1772, when Madhavrao Peshwa died, his younger brother, who was Narayan Rao Peshwa, became the Peshwa, just 16-year-old boy. And his uncle Raghunath Rao was an ambitious person who wanted to get the power for himself. Narayan Rao also behaved in some not a very wise manner, and therefore eventually in 9 months of his tenure you find that he was attacked and he was supposed to be captured, but he was killed in the melee. And that led to a new civil war within the Maratha fold. And the ministerial party, who were called the Bar Bhai, they got together against Raghunath Rao. And when Raghunath Rao left Pune for a campaign in the south, they took over the capital. Now Raghunath Rao, in course of time, went and joined the English at Khambat and later on at Surat, and signed a treaty giving huge territory to the English in exchange for their help to be put back on the throne. That led to the First Anglo-Maratha War, which is in 3 phases. The first one gets over in 1776, second one is till 1778, and third one is 1780 to 1782. The Second Anglo-Maratha War was when the Marathas began to have a civil war when their Peshwa died of an accident in 1795, and there was no successor. The only other relatives of the Peshwa family who were there were in prison, that is Baji Rao II and his 2 brothers. Now it was felt that in a feudal setup which we had in those days, it was necessary for somebody from the family to take over as the next Peshwa. Even then it led to a 14-month standoff between Nana Fadnis, who opposed it, and Daulat Rao Scindia, who said that let's get the Peshwa, Baji Rao as the Peshwa. And then Baji Rao came to power as the Peshwa. Now this entire period, 1803 to 1805, can be called the Second Anglo-Maratha War. In around 1815, when an emissary of the government of Baroda had come to speak to the Peshwa about some arrears of revenues which were due to the Peshwa, and he was murdered in the holy town of Pandharpur. The English forces started chasing him because the fastest way to end the Third Anglo-Maratha War was to get the Peshwa under their control. Now the Peshwa kept writing letters to all the potentates who were there in India at that time, the Bhosles of Nagpur, the Holkars, the Scindias, right up to the king of Nepal and the Sikhs, the Rajputs. He wrote letters to everybody that let us all rise up at this point and get rid of the English. And although this battle went on for about 7 months, with the Peshwa running here and there to evade the multiple English forces coming at him, finally in June 1818 that he had to surrender, and that is what ended actually the Maratha rule in 1818. And from then onwards the English actually took over the administration of the entire kingdom, and the first thing they did was to go after the several rich cities and towns which were under the Holkars, the Bhosles and the Peshwa.
After 1818, that is when the empire, you can say the Maratha Empire, breathed its last. And that is the time when there was a lot of loot. So there was loot from the Deccan, which is called the Deccan Booty, which has been documented by the British. The booty was about 5 million sterling, pounds sterling, which comes to about 5 crores at that time in 1818. And they have taken just about anything. I mean, there is a documentation of the jewels that were there. Not just the jewels, the precious stones that were there, right from diamonds to rubies to sapphires. There is mention of small deities in gold and other precious metals, as well as in gemstones, which they carried. They've carried palanquins made of pure silver. And this was all personal property. This property belonged not just to the Peshwas, but it also belonged to the Holkars, the Scindias, and a lot, Mehendares from here. So basically anybody and everybody who were against the British, all their properties were seized.
The other palaces, like the Peshwa's palaces, he had several palaces in Pune. Now each of these palaces were systematically taken down, and every item within the palaces was sold. The timber itself has been valued at various places at 13,000 rupees, 14,000 rupees. So the very fact that timber was taken down means these palaces were demolished to get the whatever wealth they could get from these places. So it was like you have a ship breaking yard where every single component of the ship is broken down, valued and sold off. Now, one example which stands out in all this is the matter of Naroba Auti. Because when the Peshwa left Pune in 1817, after the first battle of Khadki, for months before that, he had been sending a lot of his own treasure as well as the government's treasure to various forts, strong forts of his, which had, like the fort of Raigad, had never been captured before. It had only been taken by bribing some Killedar or something in the past. And Naroba Auti was the Killedar or the head of the fort. Now there he sent a lot of his wealth. So the capital of Chhatrapati Shivaji, you find, was set on fire for 3 days. The entire records, their palaces were all demolished in this firing. And finally they had no choice but to raise the flag of surrender. And the terms that they were given was that they will be allowed to leave the fort with their personal wealth and their personal weapons. But Naroba Auti, it is said that he probably concealed the wealth of the Peshwa, which was in the form of gold Venetians, gold mohurs and so on, in the kamarbands of his men. Now, there was a Lieutenant Robertson who was appointed as the collector of Pune at that time, the civil administrator of Pune. And one day in 17th of July 1818, he goes and naps Naroba Auti from his house and brings him to the Junawada. This imprisonment carries on for almost 4 months, during which time the entire amount which had been recovered from them, which at that time was valued at about 7,62,000 rupees, is entirely liquidated and the army is deposited with the company. When Naroba is released from there, he is a pauper. One of the biggest caches of treasure which they found was in the city of Nasik, which was again belonging to the Peshwa, but a huge amount of treasure was associated with the temple over there and in several palaces in that town. So the British officers who took the town of Nasik, they actually dug up these places, and there was a Captain Briggs who later on became a general, who was instrumental in finding most of these jewelry at that time. And you will find lists of 5 pages of lists of just the jewelry which was captured at that time. So amongst these jewels, one very prominent diamond which was found, in those days they called it the large diamond of Nasik. And this diamond at that time was valued by itself by about 1,30,000 rupees.
I think the Nasik diamond, it was mined in the 15th century in Andhra Pradesh. It weighed 90 carats when it was in its original state. What they say is it was in the crown of Trambakeshwar at Nashik, on his head, on the crown of the deity. And Baji Rao II, it is said it was in his possession later, but I think he must have taken it as a safekeeping because he knew that the British would go and attach all of that also, all that booty or treasure that they had seen. Today, it is said that the carat weight has been reduced drastically.
It was first cut from 89 carats to 78 carats, and then it was auctioned to the USA. A jeweler in USA bought it, and he decided that even now it doesn't look bright enough, so he cut it further, and it finally came down to 43 carats, which is half of its original size. But even at half of its original size, it is measured at about 2.3 centimeters, which is still a little less than an inch. And it has gone through several auctions, and I think the last auction was over $3.5 million. So, and I think it is in a private collector's hand somewhere in the Middle East right now.
There has been many generations which have passed now, and none of us have ever seen this kind of wealth that the Peshwas or the Marathas had. So it's very difficult to know, but yes, there is documentation of what kind of jewelry the women and the men wore of that time. I have that list. It's not published yet, so I'm not going to give it out, but I have each and every article that was taken and looted. Again, there is no way to bring it back because most of it was melted and taken by the soldiers, the mercenaries, and who the British colonels were at that time, Colonel Briggs, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And again, there was a huge court case going on between the royal family and the East India Company. So, and I have all the unpublished letters and the court case.
And this loot, as you can call it, was what became the topic or the subject of contention between three powers: the owners who had lost this money, the East India Company which claimed it as their own, the army which said it belongs to them, and of course the crown. The civil servants were told that this belongs to this crown, the property belongs to the crown, the British crown. So these four people were contesting for this thing. As far as the loot of India is concerned, this was a continuous process. For example, the revenue which they got every year, Peshwa's territories yielded them 87 lakh rupees, and each of the other princes 50 to 60 lakhs per territory. So this was a loot which continued and which was partly repatriated back to their own lands. Again, after the war of 1857 to 59, you find that, for example, the Banda Kirvi battles. The Banda Nawab was the descendant of Baji Rao and Mastani, and the Kirvi was a descendant of the Peshwa family. Now, these two principalities at that time fought with the British in the 1857-59 war, and they were completely looted and denuded of their wealth. In fact, there are reports of gold chips being taken away in bullock carts from Kirvi. And again, the Banda Kirvi booty is a different story, very much like the Deccan booty, which went on in the courts of England for another 7 or 8 years after that. And there's copious amount of material available about this loot in the files which are there in the British Library at London. After the 1818 war was won by them, they began a systematic administrative kind of control over the rest of the country, and practically the whole of India came under them. But there was still some parts of India which were not directly governed by the British, in which where you come to the regions beyond the Sutlej, which was the empire of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So that was still not under British control for a very long time. As far as the loot of India is concerned, I would say the loot continued.
Watch the series India's Looted Treasures only on News9 Plus. Download now.